Okay, so decided to get up super early in the morning and do a little video on this strange looking truck that I bought a couple of years ago now, back in early 2021, when some fella posted something on Facebook. His question being, what is it and how much is it worth? Your usual sort of questions you ask on a forum when you want to shift something quickly. Now, I couldn't answer either of those questions because I didn't know what it was, and if you don't know what it is, then you don't know what it's worth. So I was the worst person to ask, but I was fascinated by it because it was the most bizarre looking vehicle I'd ever seen in my life. Okay, so it's a Ford Blitz. Really common down under. There was stacks of them. There aren't so many now because it's getting on for nearly 80 years since the end of the Second World War. So any usefulness that these vehicles might have had has long since passed. And they've given way to much more powerful, bigger vehicles that are more comfortable and reliable and all the rest of it. So these things now, you don't see large numbers of them anymore. Anyway, notwithstanding my ignorance, I made an offer, and the guy very quickly accepted it because I think he realised that it was probably worth more to a collector than it was to a scrap man. And here she is. She's sitting in my front garden, and that thing over there is a shed that is hopefully going to be built in the new year, and then this wonderful old beast is going to go inside it, and then I can start restoring her properly. Okay, so all right, it's a Ford Blitz. How do we know it's a Ford Blitz? Well, I can show you, because Ford, being the wonderful company they are, they like to advertise, and there is a big badge on the hood, bonnet, and it says Ford V8, because underneath the hood, underneath this rather skanky looking jacket, is a flathead V8. If I just move the cover, you can see your rows of pistons down there. You've got 4 on one side, 4 on the other, so you've got 8 cylinders. Sadly, she is not running. She's seized because the joker that owned her before me left the hood off, and the carburetor and the water ran down into through the manifold and into the engine. Happy days. Specifications. Okay, so its technical name was F60L. The F stands for Ford, and we've just gone over that. So Ford manufactured these trucks. Ford manufactured a lot of things during the Second World War, heaps and heaps. Kept the economy going, kept Ford going, kept the war machine going as well. The 60 stands for 60 hundredweight, which apparently equates to 3 tons. So, if this thing was complete and it had its tray on the back and, all of the other bits and pieces like the doors and the roof and everything else, it would weigh 3 tons. L is long wheelbase, because this is clearly a long chassis. It's got a ladder chassis. You can see the various cross members that run their way from the back of the chassis all the way up to the front. Give it strength as well, durability. The differentials, you can see those here. The front and rear ones, obviously, for your wheels at the back and then your wheels at the front. These are split diffs. Ford seemed to be a big fan of the splits. Ford weren't the only people to build these. Chevrolet were also given the contract to build them. The other names for them, CMP is another one, which stands for Canadian Military Pattern. And then they're given, sort of less formal names. Monkey Face is one, Cab 12. Which is like a model type of cab, because both Chevrolet and Ford constructed a variety of different cabs during the war. This one's an intermediate. So 11 was the first, very similar to this. The only visual differences on the trucks were the hood. On the Cab 11, this thing here I think it was hinged, so you could open up this bit, but not the actual entire hood itself. And I think the designers very quickly realised that it was harder for the mechanics to get into the engine bay if all you had was this tiny little slot or opening on the top. So when the Cab 12 came out, they introduced what was called, I think it was a crocodile hood. So hinged hood, whole thing came up it gives you greater access to the engine bay. Cab 12s were constructed, I think, only in 1 year, and that was 1941, so fairly early on in the war. But they were very common with the Australian military. In fact, I think the Aussies were the only army, aside from the Canadians, who actually built all of these. They were all built in Canada, and then they were shipped over to Australia during the Second World War. When I found her, believe it or not, she was in even worse condition than she is now. So she had, I think on the back there were two split rims, two split rims on the back. Both the tyres had been shredded. On the passenger side, the truck was resting on its axles and the wheel hubs. This wheel here had gone, and then I think there was some very old sort of period wheel on the other side with another flat. The back panel here, which you can see in situ, which is the biggest cab panel, obviously, wasn't there. They'd stripped all of the rear sections of the cab off. The doors had gone west because obviously the owner wanted to get in and out of the cab as quickly as possible without having to open and close doors. And I think that's one of the many reasons why vintage trucks like this one in Australia don't have the doors. Luckily enough, I've got them. I found them from a donor cab down in Victoria. But the doors themselves were often the first things to go. The lamps as well, or the headlights here, they're funny looking things, make the front look a little bit like a frog, I reckon. I don't know why they called it monkey face, they should have called it frog face. Those lamps weren't on the truck, they'd been replaced. So I found these on the same cab that I got the doors from. But I think she's amazing. I think she's really interesting and very underrated, unsung, not very popular with collectors. Probably should explain why. Well, the biggest difference between men in the 1940s and men nowadays is probably about 8 or 9 inches in height, because the average height of an Australian soldier, or any soldier in those days, was about 5'7", 5'8", and I'm 6'3". So, like a lot of guys at the present time, you know, we're going to struggle to get into one of these things and get out of them. Now, if you have a look into the cab itself, just swing the camera out, you can see how limited the space is for your feet. And this is a lot better because the engine panels, you can see where they run either side of the engine and the gearbox, are clearly not in position. They're not in situ, so it's difficult to get an idea of how cramped it can get inside there. The other thing as well, which is a bit of a no-no really, is or disadvantage, sorry, is the fact that the engine is so far back into the cab itself. So these things were, I think the name they gave them was COE, or abbreviation, and COE stands for cab over engine. So the designers pushed the engine itself, the engine block, back further into the cab so that the front end of the truck didn't take up as much space, because of course they wanted to transport a lot of these things to and from places during the war, and the more that they could fit into the hold of a ship, the better it was for them and the better it was for the war effort. So the designers didn't really think too much about the creature comforts of the driver and his passenger. They're so strong. That's the thing. Another thing that I love about these vehicles is that even though this thing has been sitting out in the open for several decades, and you know, it does have, unfortunately, a fair bit of pitting along the sides here, because of some fish plates, I think they call them, or banking plates, to add a bit more strength to the chassis. You can see the damage that's been done along the leading edges of the chassis. But even so, notwithstanding that, these things are built to last. They're absolute beasts. Very, very strong, very sturdy. You know, I think it would take quite a lot to knock one of these things around. And that, I guess, is part of the appeal and why so many of them have lasted for long. You can see the odd dent here in the wheel arch or mudguard, fender, or whatever you want to call it, depending on which part of the world you come from. I honestly don't know how many of these were made, and similarly, I don't know how many of them are still around. Maybe a few hundred in this country, maybe less, I don't know. But this one, is you know, it's a good example, an unrestored example, obviously, of a truck that should be really significant to Australian military history, because these old things really were the backbone of the Australian Army. Historically, I don't think the Ford Cab 12s ever left Australia. I don't think they ever went to, you know, far off theatres of war like the Chevrolets. I've been told that Chevrolet trucks were sent overseas, and they ended up in North Africa, so the African theatre, and have, I guess you could say, probably a little bit more of a proven and prestigious track record, military history, whereas these things, they stayed home and were used to supply munitions and you know, transport troops up and down the east coast and central Australia, up the far north, out west, you know, to Perth and Western Australia. I think that's probably it, really. I could take you around and show you where some of the things used to go. If you look here, you can see 2 straps. That's for one of 2 fuel tanks. They had one either side, rectangular fuel tanks, and they carried about 15 imperial gallons either side. This is the driver's side step, and if you look just beyond it, there's another rather rusty looking panel. That's where the battery used to go. You got suicide doors here, so they open from the front, and as you can see, the hinges are at the back. As I said, I've got those doors, and they're very hard to find because they tend to be thrown away and scrapped. 2 seats in the front. You can see the mounting holes for the seats. You've got one either side, so this is the driver's side. Right-hand drive. All Canadian vehicles were right-hand drive because they were made for British and Commonwealth soldiers, not for the Americans. American stuff, all left-hand drive. So there's your seat, the holes for the seat runners, and then on the other side, of course, that's where the passenger would sit. And then if I just wander around, I can show you where one of the grab handles is, which of course really does offer you NAFL protection because there's no seatbelt. So if you look here, just there, I think it is, that's where the grab handle would go. And that was about basically the only safety measure the passenger had to stop him or her being thrown out or catapulted through the windscreen. So that's about your only safety measure. Windscreen flips out from the top. It's a bit ropey. It's years and years of exposure, rainwater and all the rest of it. So that can be fixed, but as you can see, it's very rusty down the bottom and along either side as well. So there you go, there you have it. A 1941 Ford Blitz, long wheelbase, Cab 12, monkey face, CMP, yada yada yada. Brilliant trucks. And the reason why I'm doing this video is because I just want to be able to put some more info out there about these trucks, because there really isn't much on the internet, and there certainly aren't any YouTube videos that are more than about 30 seconds long about them. Great trucks, really proud to own one.